Most people know about Kazuha's capability to effortlessly fit alongside most hypercarries and directly improve them through his straightforward supportive abilities, grouping capabilities, and damage output. What not many people know is that Kazuha also fits a very interesting niche that allows him to magnify something that is generally looked at with disdain from the community: Electro Reactions. The popular agreement for Electro Reactions is that they're pretty weak, for two reasons. First, they rely on elemental mastery for the most part, and building that at the expense of other offensive stats is generally a loss for the units that can proc an Electro Reaction. Secondly, Electro Reaction's damage is based on the elemental mastery of the character that procced it, and since it's basically impossible to make a single character directly proc the reaction every single time due to overall game randomness, you'd have to build elemental mastery on multiple units for the reaction damage to be consistent, which is clearly not worth. In this video I will specifically analyze Overload and how Kazuha makes it good. Let's start from the basics, quoting Keqing Mains, which provides a satisfying explanation. Overload is an elemental reaction between Pyro and Electro. It's an AoE attack that can even hit multiple enemies at once when procced. However, it has an internal cooldown of 0.5 seconds tied to its damage, meaning that, for example, you can make Overload hit an opponent 2 times simultaneously by proccing it on 2 opponents that are close to each other. Overload causes huge stagger on opponents, which can be helpful against big enemies since it stops their reactions, but it can also be annoying against small enemies since it will push them away in a random direction, so it's something to keep in mind. Now, how does Kazuha help with Overload? Kazuha is a character who is able to infuse elements with his abilities at a very high rate, and through that infusion he can even generate elemental reactions that scale off his own elemental mastery. In a full rotation, Kazuha is approximately able to use his elemental skill 2 to 3 times, and is burst once, which results in 7 to 8 potential procs scaling off him. The ideal thing is that his burst attacks at regular intervals of 2 seconds, which is low enough to ensure he's the one proccing the reactions every single time. Something that also helps is his infusion order mechanic. In fact, when multiple elements are in range of his abilities, Kazuha will generally prioritize Pyro over every other element for an infusion. This means you need consistent electro application sources and a Pyro character on the team to allow Kazuha to execute his Overload rotation, which involves Kazuha infusing Pyro to hit opponents that have electro applied on them. My preferred composition for this is a standard Beidou carry comp with Fischl and Bennett. This trio alone is already extremely strong, as both Fischl and Beidou can snapshot Bennett's elemental burst buffs for a high damage increase throughout the whole rotation, so adding Kazuha's damage contribution to this can really be the cherry on top. Let's see how a generic rotation is normally executed. First, Bennett's elemental burst. Then you use Fischl's elemental skill for reliable electro application on opponents. After that, Kazuha's elemental skill, which will infuse Pyro thanks to Bennett's elemental burst, and proc an Overload. Chain that with Kazuha's elemental burst, which will infuse Pyro again, and then you can execute your Beidou rotation, which will allow you to get strong enough electro application on opponents to get consistent Overload procs out of Kazuha. If you have around 900 elemental mastery on Kazuha, you will be able to generate overloads with 16,000 to 20,000 worth of damage every time. The damage volatility depends on whether you've been able to swirl Pyro as well in this comp or not, which isn't always consistent. In turn, in a double Pyro 1 Electro composition, it's much easier to swirl Pyro, but the electro application being weaker in that case makes the overloads inconsistent. In any case, these overload procs at the very least double Kazuha's sub DPS in basically any AoE scenario, and still contribute greatly in single target scenarios, making him a top tier damage dealer. Overload is still problematic against small enemies due to how easily it spreads them around, pushing them outside of Kazuha's burst range at times. Also, opponents who can quickly dash out of Kazuha's burst will basically negate many overload procs. You can somewhat fix the small enemies issue through Kazuha's elemental skill, which allows you to group them again, but the second issue is a bit harder to fix, especially if you're against opponents that are unaffected by grouping. Beidou, Fischl, Bennett and Kazuha is in my opinion a really strong meta comp, and while this doesn't override Overload's mechanical issues, it's nice that we have ways to take advantage of its huge damage ceiling to strengthen cores that are already really good as a baseline. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, make sure to leave a comment, put a thumbs up and subscribe. See you next time!